Today we're going to be learning about character traits, which will help us better understand the characters we read about. Our goal today will be to learn how to identify a character's traits in a story. And to do that, we're going to learn what character traits means. We're also going to learn how to organize information from the story in order to figure out a character's traits. Character traits are what a character is like on the inside. Don't describe them on the outside by saying things like they were pretty. You want to describe what they're like on the inside. So you might want to use words like friendly or helpful rather than fast, because that describes how they're acting. Character traits are different for every character. Some examples are kind, selfish, and friendly. Do you see how all of those describe how the character is on the inside? And character traits can help us understand characters better. To figure out a character's traits, we can look at his or her actions. We can look at his or her words or thoughts. And we can look at his or her motivations. Let's give it a try. We read this passage already when we learned about sequence of events and motivations, but why don't we read it through again just to make sure we remember it all? Read along with me. A wolf found great difficulty in getting at the sheep, owing to the vigilance of the shepherd and his dogs. But one day it found the skin of a sheep that had been flayed and thrown aside. So it put it on over its own pelt and strolled down among the sheep. The lamb that belonged to the sheep, whose skin the wolf was wearing, began to follow the wolf in the sheep's clothing. So, leading the lamb a little apart, he soon made a meal of her. For some time, he succeeded in deceiving the sheep and enjoying hearty meals. Let's remember our strategies for figuring out the character's traits. We want to look at his or her actions, we want to look at his or her words or thoughts, and we want to look at his or her motivations. In this case, we're going to be focusing on the wolf. We can use a graphic organizer to do this. In this graphic organizer, it's all about the wolf, which is why the wolf is in the middle. Then you can see that there are 4 sections. In one section, we'll talk about the wolf's actions. In the next section, we'll talk about the wolf's thoughts and words. Then we'll talk about the wolf's motivations. And finally, we'll be able to figure out the wolf's traits. Previously, when we read this, we already figured out the wolf's actions. So let's write those in now. We know that the wolf had trouble getting to the sheep. We also know that the wolf found the skin and put it on. Additionally, the wolf ate the lamb. And finally, we know the wolf ate the other sheep too. In this story, the wolf doesn't do much talking. Actually, he doesn't do any talking. He also probably has thoughts, but the story doesn't tell us what those are. So we're going to leave that section of the story, of the graphic organizer, blank. Sometimes this happens. If there are thoughts and words, you'll want to include them here. Then we're going to look at the wolf's motivations. We already talked about these, and we know that the wolf was probably very hungry. And then we also know that the wolf was trying to trick the sheep so that he could eat them. Now that we have the rest of the graphic organizer filled out, we're ready to start thinking about the wolf's traits. You can figure out the traits by looking at all of the other sections of the graphic organizer. So for one, we know that the wolf was trying to trick the sheep. So the wolf was probably pretty tricky. That's one of his character traits. We also know that even though the wolf was hungry, he was trying to eat the sheep, which is not very nice. So he was only concerned with how he was feeling, which was hungry. So that makes him selfish. That's another one of his character traits. Finally, if you look at the last sentence, it says that he succeeded in deceiving the sheep. So that means that the wolf was deceitful or lied a lot. So that's another character trait. We use the actions and motivations to figure out the wolf's character traits. Great job. When you're doing this on your own, there are a few questions that you might see that will mean that you really want to think about the character's traits. One of those might be, what word best describes and then they'll give you a character's name. So in this case, you might get, what word best describes the wolf? You also might see a question like this. What would change a character's feelings? For this story, that question would be, what would change the wolf's feelings? And you could think back to what his character traits are to figure that out. I think you're ready to try this on your own. Go ahead and get started.